But yeah, in terms of impact, first of all, I just have to say, like, what other medium these days are you able to get people together and share an idea with them for, we're talking literally like 20 minutes, 5 minutes, an hour. Like, I think sometimes as speakers, we might have or anyone thinking about a presentation, we might fall into the trap of thinking, well, it's only a 30-minute presentation. I like to think of it, and I think it's important to think of it as, if there's 20 people in that room and you're giving an hour-long presentation, you've gotten 20 hours worth of people's attention. Like, that's incredible. There's nothing else.
Welcome to today's podcast. My guest is Luke Goetting, a top keynote speaker and expert on Gen Z engagement. Now, I know Luke from my time at Prezi, where he was part of the Prezi Experts program. Luke knows a huge amount about presentations and public speaking, and also Gen Z. He teaches companies how to connect with and keep young talent. His talks are fun and full of great tips on leadership and communication. He even hosts a podcast called Gen Z at Work, where he shares more insights. Now, it's fair to say Luke has seen the importance, impact, and benefits of building the skill of public speaking, both for himself and his business, but also for many other people. So let's enjoy the conversation. So, Luke, welcome. It's really great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Always love talking about the world and the power of presentations and conversations with audiences.
Exactly. So I thought we could kick it off with taking you back in time and just understanding a bit of your backstory in terms of, where did you first start having to stand up in front of people and talk and present, whether that was at school or first job, whatever it was?
I feel very fortunate that I somewhat accidentally stumbled into this opportunity. My first job out of college was in outside sales. And so, it happened very quickly in my career. I worked for a manufacturer in the electronic security world. So we made camera systems and alarm systems, things like that. And so I was made, it was a smaller company. I was made the first ever Midwest regional sales manager for that company, which meant I was traveling all over the middle of the United States and meeting with our various dealer representatives at their offices. And typically I'd give about an hour-long presentation about our products and updates, things like that. Some for existing clients and oftentimes people who just kind of found us for the first time. And so, it was such a great opportunity. One, just getting exposed to events and different offices and people around the country. It was so powerful as compared to just sitting at one office. But two, I really quickly realized the meeting dynamics played such an important role in my success. I quickly realized my PowerPoint was like the top asset for my career. And obviously being in sales, commission was a significant part of how I made my money. And so I got very, very interested in those dynamics and what could help facilitate better meeting outcomes. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that in a minute. So I'll just kind of say what I started with was the very classic one-way style deck that our management team had prepared. Yep. And I quickly realized, like, if you take that approach to presenting, you can go to some office in Omaha, Omaha, Nebraska, for our international listeners, that you might only meet with them once every year, and you could just talk at them for that entire hour, shake some hands at the end and leave, and have no idea, was it good? Did people resonate? Did they even understand what I was saying? And that was my only opportunity to connect with them. So I quickly realized that dynamic was not the one that was going to make me most successful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, as you pointed out, as a salesperson, first of all, you're on the front lines every single day. You live and die by, can I communicate my message in a way that makes them take an action that hopefully brings me my commission? So I always think like salespeople discover the need and the power to be a good communicator much quicker than people in other positions. But if I take you back still to those first few times, because I know for myself, I definitely remember, like, I started out working in ad agencies and design agencies, and I had similar experiences, if maybe a little bit less intense. But I was also doing a lot of driving to clients and pitching for work and things like that. So if I take you back, can you remember like the early days versus the later days? Because I think it's a process of, you know, going from like, oh, I just need to get through this to, okay, now I understand what I'm doing. So I think that's sometimes
Yeah.
a useful thing to share for people.
Oh, I totally can. My the product was a little bit of a result of the product we were representing. It was sort of a hybrid between an alarm system and a camera system, and that meant it was really confusing to people. As in, camera systems traditionally just record and you view them after the fact, whereas alarm systems, they create an alert and the goal is to kind of stop whatever's going wrong in real time. And so a lot of these talking points about how you should position our product were really drilled into me from our management team. And so the first dozens of talks I gave, like, they were almost like me arguing with my audience. Like, no, don't use it for this. Don't use it this way. Don't try to do this with it. It can't do this. It can do this. They were, yeah, a little bit of a theme of confrontational, and then pair that with me being in my young 20s and meeting with industry veterans who'd been around for decades. Like, they were just they weren't the most successful dynamics.
So, 1 second, whilst I've got you, this is a brand new YouTube channel. It would help me so much if you could subscribe and help me spread the word. You're amazing. Thank you. Bye.
What I quickly shifted to, or maybe not as quickly as I should have, but eventually shifted to, was much more of a success story based presentation, showing examples of what we can do. I started building, which was really funny later that you and I met and talked about conversational presenting. I
Yeah.
had some very rudimentary linking happening in my PowerPoint where I had these little icons at the top of my PowerPoint that I knew what they meant, and I could bring up a success story. Once you've given a presentation, I think all presenters, like, once you've given it a handful of times, you can start to anticipate what these questions are gonna be when people start to ask them. And
Yeah.
so I had a very early version. It wasn't a Logitech Spotlight. It was like a key span. It had a little joystick, but it kind of fundamentally did what the
Yeah. Yeah.
Spotlight could do, where I could use that mouse functionality to click on something and bring up success stories pretty much as the questions were being asked of me. And so I realized, hey, if I can share examples of how our product's being used, that is going to trigger a lot of ideas for these audiences. And I also try to become much more intentional about building in opportunities to align with my audience, like check in after my intro, check in after the halfway mark, find out what they're thinking about, how they're thinking they could potentially bring our product to their customers. Because again, if I just sit there and give my canned talk for an hour, we're not creating any of those connections. We're not digging into any of those opportunities, and I'm wasting real opportunities to connect.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were definitely an early pioneer of conversational presenting. I love it.
Yeah, I didn't even have that amazing phrase that you
Yeah.
introduced to me years later. But yeah, it was really powerful to be like, here's an example of this in action, exactly scenario that you're describing. Like, it just got them so much further along to
Yeah.
connecting with me and understanding what I was trying to share with them. Like, I'm biased. I love visual aids, but to me, you can always tell a compelling story, of course. But pair that compelling story with some simple installation photos, like, that communication so much deeper. And the fact that I was able to bring them up pretty much within seconds of someone asking about them, it really helped my effectiveness.
Yeah. Great. So, moving forward, how did you go from sales to starting your own presentation agency when we met? What was that journey like?
Yeah, I feel like I'm just sucking up to you, but it's all just kind of happened this way. I found Prezi, and in my days, it's still doing the outside sales. And I got really excited about its potential from a spatial communication. The ability to zoom in and out to me was just a game changer in terms of being able to illustrate the big picture and the detail level without saying a single word. It's just incredible. Also, very fortunately, from a timing perspective, this was around 2012, 2013. I was seeing in my industry everyone, this is the first few generations of iPads, and people were convinced that iPads were going to change sales forever. Which is funny now, 10 plus years later. No one, I don't think anyone uses iPad for sales.
Yeah.
But everyone was buying iPads. They were, and I'd go to these meetings. Someone would have an iPad, and they would be showing like a PDF on the iPad. I'm like, oh my god, your company just spent $700 for this, and you're showing some horrible, terrible formatting PDF. And so Prezi, this was at a time when when Apple and Microsoft were still pretty contentious against one another from a compatibility perspective. There was no PowerPoint that you could load onto those early iPads. Prezi, meanwhile, had a beautiful, elegant iPad app. It was a glorious experience. You could do some conversational elements to it. So I was convinced that this was, if we are using iPads for the future, this tool, this software is how we're going to get there. And so I spent I got so excited about this idea. I quit my job and started freelancing with the goal of helping build iPad sales presentations for organizations that I'd been working with in that space. I got a little traction there, but not a ton. But by a bit of irony, one of the presentations I had built for that ended up winning the Best Business Prezi of the Year award. And so I got that. I got the press release from Prezi. I got listed eventually as an expert on their site. From there, I got leads from all over the country, some cases the world, of people helping me, wanting my help to build compelling Prezi presentations. So, yeah, I kind of became an accidental agency owner. It's been over 10 years. For the first 3, 4 years, we were exclusively Prezi.
Yeah.
And then eventually we started supporting PowerPoint and slides and all of it. But it's been just such an amazing opportunity to connect with some of the biggest tech companies in the world have hired us to for really important events like CES and South by Southwest.
Yep.
We've worked with some huge brands, and it's just been such a really neat experience to have a role in some of these presentations that are making an impact around the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, it's a great story and example of how investing time in understanding, okay, here's a new technology, and let me put something together that's going to wow my prospective customers, actually turned into an opportunity to open your own business. And suddenly your life went off on 90 degrees, and exciting things started to happen. And I think, I'm always interested in those, you know it's a bit of a big word, but like pivotal moments when you suddenly realize,
Absolutely.
like, okay, this can actually do big things for my life. Like, it's and I think that sounds like one of them, where your life suddenly goes in a totally different direction that maybe you didn't expect.
Oh, incredibly so. I was at the 6 month mark thinking, okay, bank account is getting low. Like this is probably going to be. It was kind of around. They announced the awards at the end of the year. So it was like December. So I'm thinking, all right, next year's probably going to mean start looking for jobs again. To literally 3 years later, I think I had 5 or 6 employees, and we had an office. We were churning out dozens of presentations every month. Yeah, it was pretty incredible, and that's had an impact for me to up to present day, 10
Yeah.
10 plus years later.
Yeah. Now, Obviously, like in recent times, you've also been talking a lot on stages about the Gen Z opportunity for companies, which I think in itself is an interesting topic to open. But you know, when we take into account that kind of like whole gambit from starting out in sales all the way to what you're doing recently, where you're really helping companies understand Gen Z, like what other impacts have you seen in your life that speaking has given you? You know, outside of, okay, it helped you grow a business, but what else? What else could you attribute to that?
Yeah. And to quickly connect that thread, for 10 plus years, we supported clients primarily on the consulting side and sort of the back end of the presentation process. And especially as the pandemic hit, and then afterward, when we started to get back into in-person events, I just felt like I needed to get back to my roots of giving the presentations. Clients, they're great. They pay the bills. They don't always want to take you up on your exciting ideas. They might really like your ideas, but they oftentimes won't always follow through on them. So yeah, in many ways, I feel really back to my roots, being able to be back on stages here. But yeah, in terms of impact, first of all, I just have to say, like, what other medium these days are you able to get people together and share an idea with them for, we're talking literally like 20 minutes, 5 minutes, an hour. Like, I think sometimes speakers, we might have or anyone thinking about a presentation, we might fall into the trap of thinking, well, it's only a 30-minute presentation. I like to think of it, and I think it's important to think of it as, if there's 20 people in that room, and you're giving an hour-long presentation, you've gotten 20 hours worth of people's attention. Like, that's incredible. There's nothing else I can do, short of being some famous influencer with millions of views, that has an equivalent element of that. So just being able to, first of all, sharing compelling ideas and being able to truly affect change and get people's attention in this very difficult to do thing in the modern world, is huge. But then I'll say the connections I've been able to make. So as you mentioned, I've been helping companies better connect with Gen Z. That's been my main keynote for the last year. And it has allowed me to create connections and form relationships with people already just in my short stint all around the world. In May, I gave a presentation in Poland, and there were other speakers from all over Europe. And we had a great presentation there, made connections, have some leads from that meeting. I'll be going to Australia in August. I currently have another 20 plus talks scheduled for the second half of 2024. I should do the count. I don't have the count off the top of my head, but it's at least a dozen states in the US, if not more, spanning a lot of different industries. So it's allowed me to create some amazing connections and relationships. And I think for me, being able to share and connect with them as a speaker, it really changes the dynamic. We can all go to events and sit in the audience and get a lot of amazing ideas, but the credibility you get from speaking, that means you can talk to the conference organizers and they're your ally. They're really excited to connect with you. You can talk to the heads of these organizations that are there to listen to you speak. And yeah, it's really opening doors for me. I've a few different professional organizations that I've been speaking regularly to. I've already given over 10 talks to different chapters or different events in that space. One of them being project management, one of them being HR. And that's just, again, in like roughly 6 months. And I have a lot more scheduled for their state conferences. And then I'm hoping those lead to the national conferences. Like, you kind of go one step at a time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is led to way more opportunities, some really incredible relationships. By the way, some really fun travel. hanging out at some crazy bars and decommissioned shipbuilding yards in Poland at like 3 a.m. after the event. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, just helping to build my brand and expertise. And the last thing I'll just say there is that credibility, I believe, has a very future facing element. So as I continue to develop my talk and my ideas, I expect that many people would invite me back to continue speaking to their audiences, which I think is such a powerful investment for the future.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot to unpack there. I think it's, I'm going to come back to the attention in a minute because I want to pick at that a little bit. I think it's really good. So I think, like, yeah, you have the ability to get the attention of many people for a decent chunk of time, which, let's face it, is not easy to do these days. There's definitely connected to that a networking thing. It gives you access to spaces and people that maybe you wouldn't have had ordinarily. And the travel side of it, like, yeah, I think eventually it's can take you to many different places. But the attention, I want to come back to that because I think that as well can easily be classed as like a superpower, if you like, of being a great speaker, because it's not just, okay, I get to go into a conference and I have 20, 30, 100 people who listen to what I say or the conversation I have with them for a certain amount of time. But it can also be somebody who works inside a company and they go to present to the board, or they present to senior management, or they present to their team. And again, it's a way where people stop their busy day-to-day lives and they will focus for 5, 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is. So I think attention is, yeah, something that people don't, or maybe people don't think about as a huge benefit of being a really good speaker. So I think that's it's something that I think we can develop more in a way, or think about it in a different way.
Absolutely. I've been fortunate to not have a boss for much of my career, but during the early days of my career, some of our executives, like, I would pop into their office for a question or two that I had, and you could tell it was very, like, they were kind, but it was very transactional. Like, okay, I've got a time around mentally, and like, I want to clear this conversation out in a minute or two. So yeah, it's very difficult to get anyone's attention, and then all of a sudden to be blessed with 5, 10, 15 minutes. And I know I'm going to flip the script a little bit, Spencer. I know sometimes as listeners anticipating a presentation, that feels intimidating, right? You do have the CEO's attention. Well, that's kind of intense at the
Yeah,
same time.
100%.
I
Yeah.
would just emphasize the bar, in my opinion, for professional presentations. We've been doing our best over the last decade or so. It's still, in my opinion, incredibly low. Someone who focuses on the audience's interests, someone who tries to create a conversational dynamic, like I referred to earlier, someone who puts in the time to rehearse, and also just trying to be fun. And I really aim to be much more casual in my presentations. I've got the facts, I've got the data, I've got the impact, but it doesn't need to be this really buttoned up affair where we're just reading from Excel sheets. Like, if you put in that effort, I believe it's not that huge of a bar to get to some of the top, over the top 50%, but really getting into the top 10, 20% of presentations if people are willing to put in and cover those basics, which so many people don't.
Yeah, a complete agreement. Many times when people say to me, Spencer, how can I get better at presenting? I normally say, well, the first thing is, if you double the amount of time you spend on the next one, I guarantee you're already going to be, you know, heading into much better territory than most people. Because it's something that, but I think this also comes back to, it's seen as a scary, negative, tough, why the heck would I do this kind of thing? So I think that in many ways stops people from doing it in a big way. And then you add on top of that, many of the softwares, have trained people to open the software and click to add text, and they just start putting stuff into the presentation. So I think, yeah, anybody who takes the time to stop and think like, okay, who's it for? What's it for? What's my three key messages? How, just do some basics before we even do some basic design work. It's, yeah, you're leagues ahead of most people. But I think that's the good news in a way, that it's not saying, okay, you've got to now do something enormous and heavy and difficult. Actually, just pick off some of the things that make a huge difference, and you're already ahead of the crowd. So it's definitely
Yeah.
a way.
And I actually want to, I'll use my psychology as a bit of an example here for, again, just to try to convince people of the opportunity. I think a lot of times when we hear public speaking or we hear presentation, we are when our heart starts bumping, we're thinking of being at some large gathering, whatever, a networking event or even a wedding, and someone just like out of nowhere says, "Hey, Luke, what are your thoughts on this?" Totally unprepared, totally off the cuff, and that is terrifying. It's terrifying, as terrifying for me as anyone else. I think of what I do as much more of a performance. When you have that opportunity to prepare your content, when you have that opportunity to practice it before your meeting, yeah, with an appreciation that there will be some room to be flexible and to adapt to the audience's interests, which we can also plan for, by the way. We can build those moments into our talks. But overall, this isn't us having to just speak in improv kind of context, or Toastmasters is another one that's a little bit more off the cuff. These are all great. Those are great skills to have, by the way. But 90+% of business presentations are not that. You have the opportunity to practice. You have the opportunity to strategize. And I think in that case, if you think of it a little bit more like a play or a performance, like, to me, that feels a little less intimidating as long as you've studied your lines.
Yeah. So if we imagine somebody listening to this conversation who's maybe at the beginning of their career, or has decided, okay, I'm terrified of this speaking thing, but I need to get over it and I want to start. What would you give as advice for maybe the first two or three things they should start to do?
Yeah, it's a great one, and I'm sure I'm excited to read all the wisdom that you got from that question after all these interviews. I think I hate to just go to this one because it's going to be the most common, but it is so easy to lose the what's in it for the audience along the way. Like, it's the most common presentation advice, but even someone as experienced like me who's been doing it for 15, 20 years, like, it's easy, like, that's kind of your guiding star, and then you get into the details, and then you make some changes, and then you make some updates, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, how am I addressing their ideas, their concerns? So that's one to always keep as a north star, and just build in, like, maybe it means every morning or every afternoon whenever you're working on this, assuming it's over the course of multiple days, maybe you're building in check-ins on that. I would recommend reassessing throughout versus just starting there. Um, I am a huge proponent of building in strategic intervals to align and check in with your audience. Um, it sounds a little improv again. I actually find it's a much more natural, comfortable way to present. It's much more conversational. And so it is legitimately, to me, in my experience, it is much, much more stressful to just talk at someone for anything about 5 minutes and just not ever know what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Like, you can see them smile perhaps or nod, but you really don't know. Are they even listening? Are they mentally somewhere completely different? And then traditionally, a lot of business presentations are much closer to 30 minutes or sometimes 60 minutes. Talking at someone for 60 minutes and never getting a feel for where they're at, it's
It's hard.
so it's hard and it's
Yeah.
awkward. So
Yeah.
what I like to do, I use a very old school example, classic AM radio. Uh, you have these, they traditionally had 4 segments an hour. Yes, it was, the cynic is like, yeah, that's for an ad break. And it's true. But every like 12, 13 minutes in these AM radio shows of an hour-long show, they had a break. They had a chance for people to pause and, in theory, digest what was being said the first time, listen to some ads in a chill way, and then they come back for the next segment. I really love that analogy for presentations. And you can, of course, adjust the timings, but I hesitate to go too much beyond 15 minutes because, again, it's just asking a lot from the audience. And it's also asking a lot from yourself as a speaker versus checking in. I get back to my first sales example. Like, I don't want to go that whole hour and not have any idea if they have questions or if they have ideas or if they have thoughts. And then I just get in my car and leave without ever knowing that and that opportunity to create a better connection with them.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm,
mean,
oh, good.
yeah, no, I just, again, just to agree with you, I love the analogy of the radio show and having the different segments. But, one of the things I've done a lot is what I call breather slides. So just like every few slides, every section, have like a slide with just your logo on it, because when that comes up on the screen, you have to shut up because there's nothing to say.
Yeah.
And it's like this, like, physical almost reminder that, yeah, okay, so I stop and I check in and I say, so I've just covered a lot, did that all make sense, what questions have you got for me? But it's also a chance for you as a speaker, especially if you're somebody who's new to it, because if we're nervous, we tend to speed up as we continue. So it's a breather slide is also a good moment just to say, recenter myself, ask what's happening in the room, and then continue. Even if there's no questions, it's also done the job of just giving you a bit of a breather as well. So I'm a huge proponent of finding ways to almost force yourself to stop for a moment. It's
Yeah.
important.
And it gets back to my performance analogy is like you can script all this, you can build this all in. To your point, if you're using visual aids, have a slide that forces you to stop.
Yeah.
A simple one I like, I like your breather idea. You can put like the little light bulb icon. So yeah, this is all can be planned in advance and built for that strategy. The last thing I'll say, this is what I've found more recently that I've been really impressed with. The classic. So the very base level. This is just my third and final point. Advice. The base level advice is, of course, don't have a script on your slides. If you are choosing to use slides, don't have a script. There's an inherent element there, whereas if you're literally reading off of it, you kind of get out of that presentation mode altogether. You're doing something different now, and it's difficult to get into that storytelling style vibe when you're just literally reading something. But this is common advice, so I'm going to try to take a step further. What's been working really well for me recently is I've been using icons as my bullet points. So I still recommend, I think it's great to have some prompts, some reminders. These are high stress environments. These are intense. It's not
Yeah.
unreasonable that you might need a little bit of a calibration from time to time. So let's say I do have 3 prompts on my slide. Typically I could have 3 bullet points. But I've been finding icons for, and by the way, the Noun Project is one of my favorites. I think you're a big fan too, Spencer. Like,
Yeah.
you can get icons. I think Microsoft and many of the tools now have icon libraries built in. Um, it's been really fascinating. I can see these icons and I can create that connection to what I was trying to say faster than if those were bullet points. Like, oh, and just at a very little glance, because sometimes you're presenting in weird rooms where the slideshow's behind you or at a weird angle, and like you don't have good visibility. And if I had to turn around, be like, wait, what were those 4 words on that bullet? Like, even that is slow. It slows me down. It gets me off my groove. I've been really impressed that if I just lose all the words and just use an icon, I've actually remembered my points better. So that's my more recent discovery is that icons without text has actually worked better for me than text that is more descriptive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great advice because it looks much nicer. It's a better experience for the audience. They're not reading whatever it is that's on the screen, so you have their attention more. So I think, yeah, it's good advice, and I think it also leads to, something you said earlier about, is to have the time to practice, because when you practice, because that's what I see a lot is people have a lot of text on the screen because they don't practice or because they
Right.
say, I haven't got the time to practice. And yep, we're all busy. Things are tough, but hands down, it's such an amazing investment of your time to practice 6 to 8 times, because then you can have less text, you can be more visual, you can gauge the room more because you don't have to stress all the time about what's coming next. So yeah, I think it's I love the combo of, less text, more visual, and practice. It's that's going to get you far.
Yeah, and it may even sound counterintuitive, but like taking that whole text thing on your slide, throwing that all in the slide notes, which I don't even use really, but like just even for practice, I like to have them there. But then having that icon that actually frees you to adapt more to the presentation. We talked about those check-in moments. Maybe you learned something during your first check-in from your audience. You can now tell that bullet point slightly in a different way because you have that freedom, because you didn't lock in this huge glob of text that, as you said, the audience is reading your lines for you. So yeah, it actually enables a little bit more. You still know your content from practicing, but it enables you more flexibility and also builds some intrigue because the audience is like, what does that icon mean? That's kind of I want to know. It actually, yeah, so it serves that purpose on both levels there.
Love it, love it. I love the idea of, yeah, it actually gives you more freedom and flexibility so you don't have to stick to the script. So if you, yeah, I say it, yeah, because you might say, tell somebody the same thing 4 different times and you'll tell it in 4 slightly different ways. So I think it's,
Correct.
yeah, really good. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. So maybe I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can connect with you in a minute. But if we finish with like, what if we go back to why should people care about the skill of public speaking? What would be your one takeaway or your one piece of advice to remember why it's important?
I'm gonna come back to the attention. And I've been thinking about this a lot, Spencer, and I'm thinking, who's someone I spend a ton of time with? Like my partner, my girlfriend. Like best case scenario in a week, we're maybe having dinner together a few times, we maybe do a weekend thing. Best case scenario, I get her attention for like 8 to 12 hours a week. um, then I give a 30-minute presentation in Poland with an audience of 100. Uh, quickly doing the math, that's like 50 hours of an audience's collective attention. It's like, again, this is just unparalleled access to people in a way that they're not on their phones. Well, they might be on their like. I'm not a huge stickler about like I try to facilitate interactivity through one's phones, but there's such short attention spans.
Yeah.
People are so distracted in every other environment. This is an unparalleled. Most people will never have access to something like this. Even as simple as speaking at a staff meeting with 10 people there, like you don't get that kind of attention in almost any other environment. And there are still social norms around presentations. Like people are generally respectful, they're generally quiet, they generally at least pretend to pay attention. So again, this is like set up for you in a way that you will pretty much never have in your career or in your personal lives. Like try sitting down with your kids and getting their attention for an hour in a row, like for parents or for siblings. So if you believe you have something important to say, this is, in my opinion, still the unparalleled way to communicate an idea.
Fantastic. The superpower of attention. I think it's yeah, I think people will enjoy that. So to wrap us up, where can people find you if they want to connect with you, listen to you more, see your talks, videos? Where should they go?
Yeah, please do reach out. I'm very active on LinkedIn. My name is Luke Goetting, Goetting. We'll probably throw that in the show notes or
Yeah.
whatever. It's an unusual last name, so I'm usually pretty easy to find. And then the website pairs with it, literally Luke Goetting, well, not literally, but www.lukegoetting.com. Would love to connect with y'all and continue this conversation.
Yeah, great. I'll put the links below the video so people will be able to find you no problem. And yeah, all that remains is to say thank you so much for your time and to share with us a little bit of your journey and experience. And there was a lot of gems in there that people can take away. So thank you
Glad
very
to
much.
hear it. Thanks for the opportunity, Spencer. It was a great conversation.
Great. And I'll catch you next time.